listening to the Real FI Podcast, where we discuss time-tested tricks, techniques, and strategies for pursuing financial independence today so that we can enjoy a better tomorrow. Financial independence isn't about getting rich quick. It's about cultivating a foundation to grow financially, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Let's figure out how to kick the 9 to 5. Here are your hosts, Patrick and James.
How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to the Real FI Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McGrath, with my co-host, James Ripion. How's it going today, James?
Good, man. Got some interesting news on my end. Had my newborn boy brought into the world. So we've been celebrating that for the past week and getting adjusted to all the things that that brings to life. And let me tell you, it's crazy. But other than that, everything's going great, man. I think we're going to have a great episode today, and I'm looking forward to digging in and sharing some awesome insights.
That's right. So everybody out there, we have Jeff Stevens on the podcast. If you guys do anything on Facebook and you follow any of the investor Facebook groups on Bigger Pockets or any of that, you have had to see his post. He's posting every day. He's got a ton out there. Jeff, how's it going today?
It's going great. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me on here.
Well, James, you know the drill. Let's get started.
Perfect. So, Jeff, why don't you give us a little bit of background on you? Just tell us a little bit about where you came from and just bring us up to today and let us know what you're up to.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. I've been a full-time entrepreneur for 19 years now. In 2003, I left my real job of 2 years, and I had a branding and marketing agency for about 10 years. And maybe a few years into that, I like a lot of people, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it's like, ooh, that's kind of interesting. I was already on the entrepreneurial path, but kind of got me interested in real estate specifically. And so my wife and I had just bought our primary residence. It had shown some at least paper appreciation pretty quickly. So we took out a home equity line and we went and bought our first property. It's a very conventional type of a deal. It was a triplex listed on the market, conventional loan. And that was cool. And I thought, wow, we should keep doing this. But I started to see like, boy, doing this stuff the super conventional way is going to be a little maybe slow going. And I started to already not like the questions all the bankers were asking me. And I was already self-employed. So that was kind of like a strike against me. So then I kind of became aware of like all the really sort of quote creative ways to do real estate, like concepts like wholesaling and all this stuff. And I went to a couple conferences, where the kind of the pitch fest sort of conference, if you've been to one of those, the run to the back of the room and buy the program kind of thing. And that got me excited. And I started doing that. And it didn't feel right though. Honestly, I had a couple experiences that just felt a little dirty. Maybe that sounds silly to say, but it just did not feel like me. And that kind of slowed me down. I was like, there's got to be something besides these two kind of polar extremes, like the sort of underworld of real estate, no offense intended for anybody, or the just, get a bank loan, buy something on the market. So it took me a while to kind of find my way and find myself to another strategy that resonated more with me. And I like to say that I think when people get the most traction is when the head and the heart align, when the strategy that they discover and employ makes great sense logically to their brain, but also feels right in their heart. So in about 2013, I switched over from my marketing agency to doing real estate investing full time. And that's where I'm at today.
Man, that's a great story. And I really love what you said right there with, the head and the heart. I think they do have to align because when you find yourself doing things for sometimes the wrong reasons, you have that moral compass kind of changes a little bit, and it's nice to get both of those aligned up. So go ahead, James.
I was going to say, focusing on that, when people follow their mind too much, that creates this shiny object syndrome. And then you're going to be chasing a whole bunch of different things down the rabbit hole and almost finding no focus and orientation. But I agree 100%.
Yeah.
You're almost putting the why behind it. That's kind of where your heart is. That's when you can really mesh your activities with your goals and get to where you want to go 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if something you're doing makes sense to your brain, but it doesn't feel right in your heart, you're never going to really give it your best, because you're going to be holding yourself back, like, this just doesn't quite feel like me. But the reverse is kind of also true. Maybe it makes a lot of sense. It feels authentic and it makes sense to your heart, but it doesn't really make like investment and business sense. You're not really going to get very far that way either. So I really think it's the alignment between those two that kind of has to happen before someone can really like maximize their own potential. That's my take anyway.
Right. So
Totally
you got started in 2013. You're transitioning out of your marketing agency, and tell us a little bit about what 2013 looks like to you as you're getting into real estate more full time.
Yeah, we had maybe 3 or 4 properties at that point, and transitioning in 2013 was just unbelievably exciting. We were, of course, at that time we were kind of coming out of a couple of years of things being a little bit rockier. So although that wasn't really a conscious, intentional part of what I was doing, I do think that was helpful, and the timing there was good. But it was a really interesting transition, because my previous business was a service-based business, right? It was a very specific type of business, very straightforward, right? Like, I will do this thing for you and you will pay me. But the real estate business is like, just all the dynamics are totally different, and even how you keep your books and all that kind of stuff is just so different that even though I was already a full-time entrepreneur for a decade, there's still kind of a lot of a learning curve, just because it was contextually such a different type of business. And what was really interesting is I thought to myself, like, okay, all this stuff that I just did over the last 10 years, I was a speaker at marketing conferences, basically, for my industry, and had those skills and that expertise. And I thought, all that is now totally irrelevant. Speaking is irrelevant. Marketing, branding expertise is irrelevant. And it took me a few years, but now I can tell you that actually those things are not irrelevant whatsoever. And it took me a while to kind of connect the dots, but I actually feel like that first 10 years of entrepreneurship did set me up well for this next chapter too.
Yes. I mean, in today's world, like, you are your brand, and you've got to be on social media, and digital is the way to go. I mean, I know we're going to get into off-market deals and all of finding that, but a lot of that you have to market for, and you've got to create a space where you can be the expert in there, and so you've kind of can build upon that. And then we were just talking about this on the last episode. Is it where you can have your business of real estate and then your real estate? So you can actually now use, your real estate business with the marketing and coaching and all of that to fund your real estate. And now you have both sides. So right. That's really incredible. So tell us where you're at now, sitting here. It's the end of June 2022. Like, what's that portfolio look like? And then what's your real estate business look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, we're in Portland, Oregon, and Bend, Oregon, which is like a resort town, a couple hours away. So all our portfolios there. I'm not a long distance type of person. I'm more of just like I'm a face-to-face negotiator. I'm kind of I like to be able to see my properties kind of person. Yeah, we have 35, 36 units or so around Portland. There's probably 12 different properties. So we have some single family homes, some houses with ADUs, with some fourplexes, a couple eightplexes and things like that. We'll do occasional flips. I mean, if I was really on my game, we'd probably do 3 or 4 a year. I think at this moment we do probably more like 1 or 2. So I'm trying to be a little bit more intentional about that, because I call that deal mix. When you've got, it's like a recipe. One recipe needs like 1 cup of flour, 2 eggs, half cup of water. To me, a real estate business is kind of the same. It's like, great, 4 rental properties, 2 flips, maybe a brokerage commission here and there, or a wholesale assignment fee here and there, that kind of creates the financial stability that each individual unique person has. But yeah, that's what we do. So I feel like I'm pretty much just a full-time marketer and buyer. I feel like I'm always a buyer. I'm occasionally a seller when the time is right. And then in the last couple of years, I've been working with other real estate investors to kind of be an advocate for this one very specific, I guess, way of acquiring and financing real estate that I believe a lot in. And it's really cool too. Speaking of things I didn't see coming at the time, but it's really awesome to be an investor and to be a coach, because when you have to explain things to other people as a coach, it solidifies the lessons yourself, right? And so it's like the better I coach, the better I become as an investor. And the better I become as an investor, the more reps and the more living rooms I sit in, then the better I become as a coach. And it's this cool synergistic kind of symbiotic, I guess, sort of the relationship between those things.
Perfect. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your market? Because I know my wife, she read some personal finance book. I can't remember the name of it. I think it had fire in the title, but I think the people ended up moving from California to Bend, Oregon, just because of how beautiful it was, all the nice attractions in the area. How close is Bend to Portland?
It's about 3.5 hours. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That movie was called Playing with Fire. I saw it
Yep,
when it came out. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us about
So I'm
that
coming
market
to you
a little
from
bit.
Bend today. Yeah. So it really, the two markets I would say are rather similar. I mean, Portland's much bigger than Bend, but in terms of, both of them I think are considered desirable places to be. Portland was interesting because like no one ever even heard of Portland, and then kind of in the early 2000s, and it became super popular, and like it was the place everybody was moving to. And then in the last couple of years, it's been sort of in the news for things like riots, and it's very left leaning overall too. So there's lots of like things like homelessness, and the cities is very accommodating of that, but to the point now where it's like, boy, we're gonna have to do something about this. So Portland's been like a little bit of a roller coaster, but it's basically like an hour to the ocean. It's like an hour to skiing. It's pretty temperate type of climate, and so I'm still pretty optimistic about Portland as a whole. Bend is much smaller, 3.5 hours away, more of like, better weather. I'm coming to you from Bend right now. It's more of like, it's kind of like a recreation place. It's got kind of a Colorado sort of vibe. So there's skiing and mountain biking and lakes and fishing and a lot of stuff like that. But the markets are both very strong. I mean, people this is a place that people want to be, apparently. I couldn't tell you the exact median home price, but it's pretty high, probably, I guess, 500,000, somewhere around there. If I'm going to buy like an apartment, like a small apartment building, like a Plex, it's probably going to be like upwards of 300 grand a door, something like that.
Wow. Okay. All right. That's crazy. So, all right. I kind of want to dive into this, but 300 grand a door. You said you got a couple 8plexes, 4plexes. I mean, that gets really expensive, especially if you're financing these, with commercial loans at 20-25% down, 20 to 25 year amortization. I mean, you need, $1 million to just be able to put down. So how have you been able to acquire this, 35 unit portfolio over these last couple of years? Doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I'm in the business of buying things and making them better. I almost never buy something that you would call turnkey. I sort of see my portfolio like a chessboard. If I can buy a queen or a king, I'm going to do that because that's what I want kind of on the back row of my chessboard. That's ultimately what I want to build towards. But for the most part, like I'm buying a lot of the other pieces. I'm buying pawns, knowing that they're going to get sacrificed in the pursuit of the better pieces, right? Or the bishops or the knights or whatever. So I buy a lot of properties with seller financing, and I buy properties that I can add value to, and then usually we'll extract the value that we've created, either in kind of a burr sort of a situation, or maybe sell something, but kind of constantly moving. I would say my portfolio is like a lot of moving pieces where we're not just buying and selling, but kind of moving even pieces of debt around throughout the portfolio to free up equity that then creates the ability to go buy something else that's bigger. But only a couple commercial loans do we even have, really. It's mostly seller financing loans.
So tell us about how you go about the seller financing process. I know I've talked about it on the podcast a few times that I've been able to get seller carryback loans, but the longest that I've really got is 3 years and $85,000 for the down payment. That's kind of how I've used somewhat of a seller financing technique to be able to purchase a couple properties, but what's your strategy?
Yeah. So, I think seller financing is just a beautiful, beautiful thing, but it's also something that most of our industry, people tend to feel like it's kind of like a unicorn. Like, wow, you can't find one of those. If you do, you're just really, really lucky. But I've learned that there's some myths about seller financing that, it's what people do when they can't sell their property in any other way. That's kind of one big one. And if they do, they're going to do so reluctantly. And so they're really going to turn the screws on you in terms of oppressive terms. And it's only going to be really short periods because they didn't really want to do it in the first place and they just want to get it over with. And I'd say, there's these myths, they come from some level of truth in the first place, but there's like a whole category of people. And I can assure you, I've talked to a lot of them who they actually want to do seller financing. Like, do they know that they want to do seller financing at the beginning? Maybe, maybe not. But a lot of them, once they start to really understand what their own priorities are, and then we start to facilitate a conversation with them about those priorities, pretty soon they're like, I swear, almost asking for it because it's the thing that fits their scenario, their situation, right? So here's what I mean by that. There's a whole group of people who, if they were to sell their property, they would have a nasty capital gains tax bill. And not everybody just wants to exchange one responsibility into another one. So with an installment sale, which is kind of like the fancy tax word of saying, carrying a contract, that can be structured in a way that can really ease the pain of their capital gains tax bill or change the timing of it, right? If somebody says, you know what, I don't mind paying this gain, but I don't want to do it now. I'd rather do it in 10 years. Great. We can structure that so you get maybe a small down payment now. You're going to have a little bit of a tax bill now, maybe some depreciation recapture, but then you're going to take the rest of that gain and just punt it 10 years into the future. And that they'll deal with it then. So that's one, I'd say that's even probably like the number one driver for seller financing is that. The second thing is a lot of people, they own, well, who has capital gains tax problems? Pretty much landlords, right? Owner occupants in rare situations could, but that's not, the primary thing, right? It's landlords. Well, landlords tend to own rental properties because they like having income. So now they sell their property. They're not really in the mood to go buy another one. Where does the income go, right? So the seller financing can be a great solution for that. So they get to continue to have the income. And then honestly, a lot of them, like they don't really know, great, you're going to get a wire for 450 grand. What are you going to do with that? And a lot of them don't really know what the answer to that question is. And even trying to answer that question feels like kind of a burden. And so there's lots of reasons. I mean, I could kind of keep going on, but like there's people who would actually rather just get payments each month, have a tangible piece of collateral that they already know inside and out. And that's a way better scenario for them. So we just have to develop the way of like reverse engineering the situation where we put ourselves in their living rooms and we start to have that conversation. And then you realize it's not quite as rare as a lot of people think.
I think that's super important to analyze is what you just said is reverse engineering the situation and finding the seller's motivation for wanting to sell and trying to pinpoint that so you can offer and key in on these benefits to seller financing. Because once you know what's driving them to make this decision, whether they're retiring and they need income or they need the cash or they don't want to pay Uncle Sam because they're super conservative, whatever the reason might be, once you identify that, you've now found your means of marketing to that person, what works for a mutually beneficial situation between the two of you. I think another benefit to the seller financing is also you get to pay them more. Like when you tell them, like, here's how much you would walk away at the closing table if we were to do a cash sale, or if I were to get a loan and bring some money, you'd get $450,000. But if we extend this 10 years and I'm paying you 4, 5, 6% interest on finance, you're going to end up walking away with, someone do the math for me on the calculator at home, $650,000, $700,000, way more than you thought you would have gotten at the closing table today. So, it's very invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus,
Yeah.
those interest payments are taxed differently, right? So they're going to get that income. They're not going to have to pay gains on everything. I'm in a situation like that, where the guy was like, well, my building's paid off. So if I seller finance it to you, then I'm going to be missing out on $150,000 over the next 5 years. And I'm like, well, but I'm giving you $150,000 more than what you could sell it for if someone went and got a loan. So it's the same, you wouldn't get that 150 grand for 5 years anyways. And I'm not going to pay you off for 5 years anyway. So you can just deal with me, or you can deal with your tenants in the property for 5 more years, and I think they do like that too, because they are still getting income. They're still getting paid, but they only have to deal with one person instead of 8,
For sure. And when you start to do this a couple times, then obviously you build up some references. And so ultimately then it gets a little bit easier, because you can point this person to the last 2 people that you've done this with. But I wanted to just really quick before we move on, like kind of double click on that idea of reverse engineering, because I kind of feel like this is the number one area that people kind of go wrong as they're trying to do seller financing. Most people who are investors and wanting to do seller financing, they will go look for properties that are for sale and then ask those people if they will do seller financing, which kind of makes sense, but is also really, really random. I mean, it'd be like, I'm sure none of us ever did this, but do you remember the concept of shoulder tapping? Like if you were in high school, like you go into a supermarket and just tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, will you buy me beer? Well, that's a really random process, don't you think? Like it's going to take a while before you just randomly find someone who's comfortable with that type of a thing. But if you reverse engineer the whole thing, then what we're doing is we're actually, and sounds weird, but like this is to me, when I learned this, a mind-blowing concept. We're shopping for a person and seeing what property they have, rather than shopping for a property and seeing if that person will do seller financing. We're shopping for a person who has that particular set of like attributes that would make them a good candidate for seller financing. And then we're talking about their property, right? So it's like most people are going fishing in a pond where there's really no reason to expect there's any fish in here that are going to be seller financing fish. Instead though, what if we found a way to only be fishing in a pond that's reasonably likely stocked with seller financing fish, and know that every time we dip our line in there, it doesn't mean we're going to catch something, but there's a pretty good likelihood that if somebody bites, that bite might be somebody, who's reasonably well suited for seller financing.
So
I totally
dig in on
agree with that.
Let's tear that open a little bit more, because you just gave us this huge nugget that I think is just going to open the playbook for a lot of people. How do you find the people rather than just looking for the properties? What are some of those actionable tips that somebody might be able to put into place and put into practice to reverse engineer this whole process and find those people who have the properties?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have to point out, to go back to the like connecting between my marketing background and this, what we do, how we brand it, how we do what we're going to talk about in a second, is super duper strategic. However, it's also extremely simple. And so I take pride in like how strategic it is, but when I describe it, you're going to be like, really? That's all? So here's the thing. I mean, if what does the perfect seller financing candidate look like? They would have a big capital gains problem. Well, let's just focus on that actually. What does that person mean? Probably they're an absentee owner. They've probably owned the property for quite a while. And especially during certain market cycles, right? Let's say, I would say today in 2022, they've owned the property 10 years or more, right? Because if they bought it in 2012 or before, chances are it's worth a lot more today than it was then, right? So those are people, absentee owners, 10 years of ownership. They've also, so they've seen a bunch of appreciation. People who have owned a property like this for that amount of time are usually not 32 years old. They're usually older in life. Like that just happens, right? An 8-plex seller avatar, typically, certainly a 32-year-old could inherit one, but generally speaking, right? The 8-plex of somebody who's owned it for more than 10 years, and some, if it's a lot more than 10 years, they're probably going to be 60 or 70. 60 or 70-year-old people are starting to think about maybe they want to spend their time in a slightly different way. So here, just to make it super tactical, here's what I would do, or what I do. I go to my market in the specific neighborhoods I want to go to. So we're talking about pulling a list now, right? So you could pull a list on listsource.com. I just call my title company and say, would you please give me a list so that I could buy properties and close them with you and you guys can make money? And they say, sure, no problem. We'll give you a list. So I ask for the list. It says this zip code, I want 2 to 4 unit properties, for instance. I want them to be absentee only. I want them to have been owned 10 years or more. And that's pretty much it. They send me this list. And now that list is like the pond that's reasonably likely to be stocked full of the right type of fish. So now I send the right type of letter, which is like the right type of bait on the end of the hook that goes into that. And this is important too. Send the right type of a message to those people. And you know that anybody who calls you, there's going to be a chance that that conversation could be directed in that, towards seller financing. But I do want to, just on a tactical level too, I want to talk about the message, because if I said that, asking the wrong people to do seller financing is kind of the main thing that people do wrong. The thing that kind of goes right with that is talking about seller financing too early. Okay. When we talk about seller financing too early, you might as well be wearing a sign on your forehead that says, "This is what I want. And I'm just here to find out if you will do this thing that I want."
You're talking about marriage on the first date. Definitely.
Yeah. And it looks so premeditated, right? It's just like, it's like, hey, I only reached out to you because I want to do seller financing, right? So what we have to do is have the conversation in a way that is not quite so obvious. We ask good questions. We elicit their response. Let them tell you that they're not super excited about capital gains tax. Let them tell you that they're not super excited about funding the current administration. Let them tell you that they hate to see the income go away. Now, if you just ask them enough questions, usually people will tell you that kind of stuff. Then when you propose back, like something related to seller financing, it doesn't look like, oh, I've been, I reverse, I planned this whole thing from the beginning. Surprise. Yeah. Instead, it's like, well, based on what you told me, Bob, you mentioned you're going to have a big capital gains tax bill. You're not really sure what you're going to do with the money anyway. You love this property. You know it inside and out. I put all that in the blender in my mind, and I was like, well, what if we did this? And then you kind of make your seller financing proposal that's completely in the context of what they told you they need, want, like, what their preferences are. And then it's not about you and what you want. It's really about serving them to the point where they're not only saying yes, they're like thanking you, because you tailored something specifically for them rather than just showing up and saying, here's what I want to do. Will you say yes? Does that make sense?
Perfect.
100% sense. I mean, that's kind of what I've been telling people too, especially finding off-market deals, whether you're going to be able to seller finance or not. When you're going after these small multifamilies, 2 to 4 units, or, even 20 units, they're mom and pop people. And like you said, if they've owned it for over 10 years, they're real estate investors. They at least have somewhat of a concept of the strategies and the things that, you're talking about. So you're talking to a different category of people. They're an investor too. They might have owned a portfolio of 20 or 30 properties at one point, so you've got to take your swing. But like you said, you don't want to do it right off the jump. You want to be a solution, to their problem. They answered your email or your postcard or your letter, so they're somewhat interested. Now, yeah. Don't be like every other person that's sending a letter or a postcard, which is a wholesaler that just wants to get the property dirt cheap and assign it to somebody else and make money being the middleman. You need to build that relationship. And I love how you said it's all about, building that relationship in people's living rooms. And that's the same exact thing. They're buying from Jeff. They're selling to Jeff.
Yeah.
They're selling to Patrick, to James. Like, you're helping me out just as much as I'm helping you out. It's got to be a win-win situation for everybody involved, because if the deal's lopsided, or if you're presenting something that's lopsided, they're going to know, and it's going to be a no. And I think that's why these seller financing deals end up going through, is because both people are, giving up something, and both people are getting something. And I love the strategy. I love what, I love what you said there. Do you find, this is a big one, do you find that, the interest rate is really a hang up, or the price, or is it typically the length of the term that is usually, the biggest negotiating chip when it comes to offering these seller financing type of things?
Yeah, good question. I don't know that there's one that jumps out as sort of consistently being the thing. You got to understand when I market to somebody whose property is not for sale, like there's not a listed price. Like we're not starting with like a predetermined understanding of like the number 700,000 and then going from there. There's really no point of reference at all. So that is even coming to light at the same time that maybe the seller financing concept is coming to light. At the same time, I'm starting to understand like what their point of reference is around, like for interest rates, for example. Interest rates as it relates to seller financing almost has nothing to do with like bank loan interest rates. It has everything to do with what the seller feels like their alternatives are. Like if the seller says, dude, I'm just going straight to crypto at 19% return, that's their point of reference. And so any seller financing proposal is going to live in that context. If somebody else says like, I'm planning to go get a CD, I trust my bank, it's 1.5%, that's the point of reference. And so the negotiation I find tends to happen in relation to that rather than in relation to like market rates. So, a lot of, again, back to sort of myths, people say seller financing loans carry higher interest rates. And I would say that's not, in my experience, there's no correlation between those at all, unless you're talking to some seller who is literally saying, I don't want to seller finance this to you. If I'm going to do it, you're going to have to make it worth my while. You can't get a bank loan. You don't qualify at 5%. So I'm charging you 7.5%. But that's like none of my conversation. So, I don't know. I could add it up. I would guess we have between probably $3 and $4 million of seller financing debt right now. And it's probably like 4.5% average stuff I've negotiated in the last 5 years. It's not onerous or oppressive interest rates at all.
I think Warren Buffett has a quote. It might be Charlie Munger, one of the two. You set the price, I'll set the terms. And I think that goes to show that, people shouldn't get so hung up on just the purchase price, because when you're doing these kind of negotiated buyer to seller direct deals, there's so many terms that go into this, between the interest rate, the term, the purchase price, how the money's paid, maybe any delays or balloon payments. There's so much more that goes into it than just the purchase price. So, when you're getting super favorable rates, sometimes that might be able to justify slightly above market purchase price from the offset. So you can kind of use those kind of chips to bargain with the seller to really hit those pain points for them. And it's all an ebb and flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Would it be okay if I take that idea and take it even one step further? Because this is a really non-mainstream idea, but I'd love to just hit it real quickly.
Please.
Okay. So when you asked me before, like what does the portfolio look like? How did you grow and stuff like that? And I said there's a lot of moving parts. So let's just talk about the moving parts for a second. So first of all, seller financing can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Like that's sort of a big term people could use to describe like subject to and land sale contracts and lease options and wrap notes. Like 99% of what I'm doing is like just a straight like promissory note and trust deed. Like I'm becoming the owner, they're becoming the beneficiary of a promissory note. They have a piece of collateral, right? Just like a bank scenario, but they're the bank and I'm the owner, right? So any real estate loan needs a piece of collateral, right? And by default, when you buy a piece of property, the property you bought is the collateral. But you have to ask yourself the question, does it have to be like that forever? And when you're talking to a regular person who's going to be the beneficiary of this promissory note, the answer is no, it doesn't have to be the same at all. So, James, what I wanted to sort of just take further was, like you said, basically, great terms can make up for a slightly higher price property. I totally agree. And I would say even like to take that further, I often buy properties, right? This is actually really a core part of my personal strategy, how I've grown, and then what I coach others on. I buy a piece of property with seller financing, and we add what we call supercharged seller financing elements to it. One of the main ones of those is the thing that says, okay, I just bought 123 Main Street from you. The collateral for this $400,000 loan is initially 123 Main Street. But At some point during this term, let's say it's 10 years, I have the ability to give you a different piece of collateral to secure this loan. I have to show you that it's worth, more than I owe you, and it has cash flow to make the payments and all that. But I could switch your loan from being secured by 123 Main Street to like 456 Oak Street. So I will often buy properties that I don't even really want at all, just for this block of financing that I've negotiated. I'm really buying two things. I'm buying the property and the financing, and I'm way more excited about the financing. So if I can buy this property, let's say the retail value of this property is 450, I can buy it for like 420. But big deal. Not a great win on the price side of things. But if I'm going to get a $400,000 note at like 3% for 10 years, now what I'm really buying is the 4% note of $400,000 at 3% for 10 years. So I'm going to buy that property. I'm going to substitute the collateral from the property I just bought to a different property. This property I just bought is now free and clear, and I'll just sell it. And that's what I'm doing is I'm basically always buying the properties I want, like the chessboard thing I mentioned. I'm always buying great chunks of debt, and then I'm pairing them up in ways that most people aren't thinking about as a possibility. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
To
That's
some
not
degree.
something I've ever heard of before. Patrick, is that something you've ever heard of? This is a total first for me.
It's not, that particular strategy is not something I heard of. It's very intriguing, but I did in one of my deals that I had a seller carryback. He had a lien against the property, and I needed to refinance the property. And what we did is he signed a letter saying that I had paid him off, and then he took out a lien on one of my other properties with the with the equity in it. And then when I went to the bank and refinanced, they gave me a check for 150 grand because I didn't have a secondary lien on the property anymore. So it's really the same thing, but I've never heard like the strategy that you had. But as you were talking about it, I'm like, man, I did that. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. So you're still making the payments, but you've collected all of the equity and everything else. And you're like, I'll just make those payments for the next 10 years and figure it out some other way, get another, great seller finance term and be able to do the same thing to pay that off whenever you have to. So that's
the seller
very
the seller still has just as much collateral as he had. It's just now it's not property A, instead it's property B. So there's no interruption to payments or anything like that. It's just basically this deed of trust got released on this property and recorded on the other one at the same time. So you basically have taken the debt and sort of moved it from one to the other. But to illustrate for everybody listening to the point that you were just making there too, Patrick, is when the debt moves from the first property to the second one, your overall equity between these two properties doesn't change at all, right? Because like this one is just encumbered now by 400,000 more, and this one over here is encumbered by $400,000 less. So your overall equity, your net worth, none of that has changed. But the distribution of that debt through the portfolio is what has changed. But now the property you just bought, that you removed the debt from, while this other one is loaded up more, this one is now free and clear. When you go to sell that and there's no debt to pay off, that's a good day, because you're selling this property now and just getting a huge wire coming into your world. And so really what you think about, if you think about it this way, in that scenario I just described, really what you did is you just went and put a home equity loan on the property you already owned, right? You already owned this property. It already had some debt. You wanted to extract some equity, like in a BRRRR, for instance. You needed to put additional secondary debt on that property. So where does that debt come from? Most people say, I go ask the credit union for a home equity loan, but not a lot of them do that. Here's the other way to do that. You just bought that loan from another seller, moved it into that slot that you wanted, and then just disposed of the property. And what are you left with? A big chunk of cash from the closing of this free and clear property. It's a little bit easier when I draw it out like on a whiteboard. So I hope I didn't go too far into that now and confuse anybody. But
I'm 100% there. My biggest question, I think, is now, what are you doing with that large that large, wire or that capital gains now? Are you 1031 exchanging this? Like, to me, I feel like I would have did a cash out refinance on the property first, got a new loan, got 75 or 70% of that tax free, and then only had to pay the cap gains on the remaining 30 when you went to sell. That's how my mind's working. But like, how are you getting around all that?
Yeah. So on the new property that we just bought with seller financing, when we go to sell that, there's probably not capital gains to be paid at all. Because if I bought it for 420, I could sell it for 420. There'd be no gain there whatsoever, but there's no debt associated with it, right? So the capital gains is not a reflection of how much debt or there is or isn't, but it's more of a reflection on what the gain was. But if I just turn around and sell it within a couple months, there's no gain to pay. It's just cash proceeds coming in. But to your point, I could just keep that property and borrow against it, right? I could go down to the bank and say, hey, bank, guess what? I own this property free and clear. What do you think? 75% LTV loan. And if they would go for that, then great. Now you get to keep that property and you get a bunch of cash that way too.
But like you were saying before, it's likely that property was your pawn. You're sacrificing it. Now you're going to be going out and you're going to be buying your rook, your bishop, and hopefully a king or a queen while you're out.
Totally.
So,
yeah.
Wow. You just dropped some serious bombs there. I really like it. That is the first time I've really heard that strategy. I definitely love that I have that in my arsenal now, because it's just got my mind like really thinking, it's playing a big game of, Monopoly, and just moving, like you said, just moving debt around, moving pieces around. And it's all in who can be the most creative, that can get further along in this game that we're all listening to this podcast, to figure out, which is financial independence. So tell us a little bit about like your financial independence goals and what it is that you're actually, trying to build here.
Yeah. It's a great question. So, I think about, so you're talking to somebody who's in a market where things are expensive and cash flow is kind of low, right? So nobody says, I'm going to create financial independence. I think I'll go to the West Coast, right? But that's where I'm at. And I believe a lot in the value of like knowing your own market really, really like the back of your hand, right? No matter where that is. I believe a lot in local investing for that reason. So anyway, I've built my portfolio local to me. And as I've asked myself these questions over the years too, because like right at this exact moment, does my cash flow for my properties like cover my food and all my, no, it doesn't. But it could if I chose to restructure my portfolio. So I have developed this thing I just call optional financial independence, which is basically to say, if you have the net worth such that you could restructure, like if I sold all my properties and just took a suitcase full of cash to like Memphis, then I could be financially independent. But I'm choosing not to do that because that's just not a move I want to make. Like it's not a strategic move I want to make. I like the properties I have. I'm comfortable with the financial situation that I have. So I call it optional financial independence, which is like with the flip of a switch, you could reconfigure what you have into not needing to work again. But I believe, the philosophical point here, I believe there's a difference between an investor and an entrepreneur. I can give you a couple of definitions to that, but what I really mean is an investor is kind of what you do, but I think an entrepreneur is who you are. And the truth is, I am an entrepreneur, and it doesn't matter what the net positive cash flow is. Like I'm going to be super bored if I'm not creating new things in the world. If I'm not creating a new property, the vision for a new property, if I'm not creating a new acquisition, if I'm not creating like a new coaching idea, if I'm not writing a book or recording a song or something like that, I'm going to be super bored. And so I don't really feel like a lot of motivation to get to a cruise control type of state. I just want to continue to improve, grow and improve the efficiency of what I have now. And at some point, if we just want to hit the easy button that says sell or exchange all this stuff into cash flow markets, no problem. We'll do it at that point. But at this moment, like I don't really feel like that.
So tell us about some of the entrepreneurial things that you're working on now and some of the things that you got going that's part of your journey. Because it sounds like you're more perhaps interested in the journey and the building aspect of things, which is what the entrepreneurial life is. not necessarily the end.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about some of the pursuits that you're working on right now.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Like one thing we created a couple of years ago is we have one commercial building. Most of our stuff is residential, but we have one, and we had like kind of the anchor space it became vacant unexpectedly and quickly after closing. So it's like, what are we going to do? So it was really fun to create. We basically just kind of created out of thin air a co-working space brand. And we said, we're just going to run this like a bunch of cubicles, basically, like kind of cool cubicles in a greater space, but it's going to have its own name and branding and logo, and we'll decorate the space that way. And, it'll have kind of its own like little mission and giving component in the little neighborhood that it's in. So I guess I think of business as kind of like a canvas. So that's sort of like one thing we painted on a canvas. Like creating the whole coaching side of everything I do is like another big canvas. So we created one about a year and a half ago. And then now those people are kind of graduating into a new thing that we're creating. So I'm creating like another level of that. But like I always have to be kind of creating something totally new. I know, and my own coach is always, he's kicking my butt and telling me I need to be creating things more like kind of in the development side of things like that. Like he's encouraging me to sort of get more into like development. So I've been, kicking around the idea of RV storage, like developing an RV storage kind of a place where people, if you got a $300,000 RV, like you probably don't want it out in the weather. So maybe there's a good, cool spot for that with like a little clubhouse for all the other rich RV owners and things like that. So that's kind of something I'm, pondering and working on. Then there's like a lot of creation of content is what I do too. And, I've got my kind of book framework right now that I'm sort of trying to put things out. And, Patrick, you mentioned we're always publishing lots of posts and things like that. So I always need to be like prolifically creating stuff, I guess.
That's extremely interesting. I'd love what you said there, because interestingly enough, I'm also working on an RV boat storage development signed a contract for last week on 16 acres. We are starting off with just the, fence, dirt, gravel, the whole nine. And then as it starts developing and filling up, we'll offer those premium, covered spaces and all that down the road once the cash flow kind of comes in. But
Nice.
Very, very interesting that you said that, because I totally agree. Like, they're building a ton of storage facilities, but everyone's trying to maximize that, dollar per square foot that they can get out of it. And when you drive by them, there's like 2 RVs and a boat. That's all they have available. So there's so many people out there that can't store them, and with HOAs and everything else these days, like there's no place for people to actually store this stuff. And you're right, you're catering to a different level of people.
So
That's
putting a clubhouse on that. I mean, that's your next step, man. Is putting a clubhouse on that thing and making it so you can have a bar lounge and whiskey tasting for all your RV and boat owners.
Oh, so everybody can sit out there and smoke a cigar and talk about how their RV is a little nicer than the one over there. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, with the coaching, I mean, that's really interesting. Tell us a little bit about the coaching model. Like what inspired you to start, coaching? Because I'm sure, like you said earlier, you get just as much out of it as you're trying to give. So is that the reason why you wanted to start that? Like, break that down for us a little bit.
So to me, there's 2 things. First of all, like I feel like I am absolutely the product of an amazing coach and an amazing coaching relationship. Like there's no way I would have found, well, I don't know, no way, but it would have taken a lot longer, way more painful for me to find that head-heart alignment if I hadn't connected with my coach, a guy named Greg Pinio. And it made all the difference in the world to me. And like the moving of the debt stuff, I didn't make that up. I learned that, and then I've tried to quote perfect the art of applying that in my own way. So first of all, like I know like the insane benefit that a great coach can deliver to somebody and the impact it can have on their life. The second thing is I feel like this approach that I practice, this very like relationship oriented, purely off market seller financing kind of thing is really not talked about in our industry. And I really think it needs to be, it needs more of a platform. Like more people need to know about this because it's so not mainstream. But I know that there are lots of people out there who they would just rather be more relational in the way that they're doing stuff, right? Like their head is saying, oh, here's the right way to do this, but it's not feeling good to their heart and they're not getting a lot of progress. And so I really believe that this might sound cheesy, but it's almost like trying to create a movement of this like extremely personal, relationship oriented, face to face, no brokers. You're just sitting on someone's couch in their living room type of approach to business, which also on the super practical level, I think you can grow a lot more when you don't have a banker who's, deciding when you deserve the next loan. Like to me, that's always like the shadow side of this is that's always felt a little offensive that like some guy wearing a tie gets to decide when I'm being responsible enough to deserve the next loan. I'm like, no, thanks. I don't want that kind of scrutiny. And so I really like the idea that you can pave your own path a lot better and feel good about how you're doing it with this methodology. So anyway, product of a great coach. And I think this message needs to be heard by more people. 1 + 1 = great coaching program.
So it sounds like, just everything that you have going on, seller financing can be a great way to get started for those people who, maybe don't have the best financial situation personally on their either credit, maybe it's something not technically a fault of their own, but or maybe they just wouldn't qualify for traditional loan. And also a great way to accelerate, into growth by taking control of your assets more. So it sounds like you get into all those different aspects with your coaching and things that you're putting back out there for the people you're working with.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And I find that most of the common denominator with most of the people I work with, I mean, there's a few things that they probably share in common, but I'd say like the number one thing is like these people they want to kind of feel good about how the person on the other end of the transaction is being treated. And they want to have more of a hands-on approach to like managing the experience for everybody, listening, creating a win-win, right? And I think that's why a lot of times it resonates because when you're doing things in the traditional way, you call the broker, who calls the broker, who calls the seller, like you have no clue at all about the other people, right? Like if you know anything, it's like what price that they want, and like that is it. But you have no ability to understand your audience, to actually, I would say the more you understand your audience, the better you can tailor something that will get them where they're trying to go. Like I literally think about a tailor sometimes. Like, can you imagine a tailor with a client who needs like a perfect fitting pair of pants or something? And the tailor's like, oh, I'm going to call my person who's going to call their person who's going to like take a measurement. And then they're going to call their person who calls my person who's going to relay the number back to me. It's like, dude, that's insane. You want to be able to touch them directly. Like, I'm going to put the measuring tape around your waist myself so I can see, oh, you said you like these types of pants, if you want to like truly create something custom, sorry for all my weird analogies. There was beer, fishing, and now making pants, I guess. But if you want to truly customize something that fits the other person, like you can't do that with two intermediaries in between. Like you have to settle for like, it's good enough. Let's just talk about numbers. And there's a whole segment of people who don't really want to do it like that. Like I don't.
I know exactly what you're saying because I was in sales for, over 12 years. And, this is the art of the deal. You are teaching, how to do sales, right? Use uncovering questions. That's the biggest thing. Like if you ask enough questions, they will lead you down the path to provide the solution that you are ultimately trying to propose, but at the end of the day, it's pressing skin. It's like you said, sitting in the living room, becoming personable, making them want to sell it to you or making them help you, and you helping them. And that part is really huge. And people that are really good at sales, they want to make sure that both sides are achieving that common goal and that everybody is happy. And like you said, Steve, and Patrick, and you get to make your own deal. And that's how it works, and at the end of the day, no one's screwing over anybody else. And there's no middlemen to kind of, interpret things differently. So,
Totally.
yeah, that's that's one of the best things. So coaching is fantastic, and I love how you put that in there. Like it's a very underserved kind of niche that a lot of people aren't teaching it right now. All over, Instagram and Facebook is wholesaling and Airbnb and arbitrage and all of that, and people an apartment syndication. Just buying and holding some rentals is not sexy anymore. And like you said, the owner finance is like the unicorn out there when it really doesn't need to be. It's just a lot more work than what most people are willing to put in when they think that, you have to be lucky, roll the dice to make it happen. So I'm so happy that you're out there teaching people, all about that. And that's great. Now, what obstacles do you see yourself facing over the next 2 to 3 years with all that you have going on, with your coaching business, with your real estate business, with your book? Like what's the main obstacles that you see yourself facing with the pursuit to that?
Yeah, I think the obstacles are all really quite self-imposed. I mean, the flip side, of course, of this extreme sort of entrepreneurial approach to things is of course like the shiny object type of syndrome, and the ability to like maintain. Like I'm a world-class starter. I'm an average finisher of anything really, but world-class starter, and like that's where the joy to me comes from. Conceiving of a new idea, starting a new idea, rather than executing the same thing forever. So that's kind of always a challenge for me. I'd say for me also like a weakness that compounds that is I'm not terribly great with collaboration. I mean, I'm more of like a lone ranger. That's the truth, right? I'm maybe a lone ranger with some help, but I'm not really if you want to go fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go with others. I'm not really like, I don't want to go that far. I'd rather just go fast myself. And so I know that can be a limitation. So to me, it's just sort of like, I find that working with my coach, coaching myself and coaching others, like 90% of what we talk about is like just what's happening between our ears, and just, get out of your own way, as my coach Greg says a lot of times. So I'm just trying to always get out of my own way and build appropriate support structures that do help me, but like in the way that actually suits me the best. I'm not like a partner kind of a person. I'm more like maybe a few delegation kind of thing, people. So I'd say those are probably the biggest ones, for me, self-imposed things. And then also, the third and final one I'll say is also a self-imposed one, which is, I don't know if I come across it like here, but I'm certainly more introverted. Like I don't really get excited for like, making a bunch of funding proposals for private money people. Like I think I'm pretty good at it, but it's not something I really get up for. So I can find myself shying away from like making phone calls and stuff. I feel like in the time of COVID in a smaller town that I moved here to Bend a couple of years ago. Like it's just easier to kind of just sit here behind my desk and like not go out in the world and see people as much as I should. And so that's something I always have to fight too. It's like fighting inertia, It's easier for me to just sit here and kind of, I'll think and brainstorm and read and stuff. And it's like, no, you need to be out there talking to people and whatnot. So anyway, I have to fight that inertia as well.
Gotcha. You got to get out of your comfort zone. And that's where most progress happens for sure. So I want to kind of get your opinion on the market. And I think that'll be interesting perspective from you to hear, because I want to know what you think that the people you deal with in your seller finance deals are thinking of the market, and maybe what you think will happen in the future if you had a crystal ball you could break out. So, mortgage rates, they're going up. I'm sure when you're talking about seller financing, at some point or another, maybe interest rates might be compared to traditional mortgage rates. And we're seeing a lot of changes there. Are you experiencing any changes in the dialogue or the conversations you're having with the seller finance deals that you're pursuing? Or, is anything changing, or, what's your feedback on that?
I feel like I'm starting to see just the very first couple hints of it. I'm not seeing a ton of real change just yet, But I think if you ask me again in a month or 2 months, I think we probably would see more of that. I put like literally no energy into crystal ball thinking or analysis, but I'll tell you what I think is, I think that in this next sort of chapter, I think that the things that will there'll be a premium on a person's ability to have a conversation directly with the seller and ascertain what the different like deal structures are that can try to get them where they're trying to go. Because I think here in these last few years, it's been very straightforward, kind of just like the traditional way of doing everything, put it on the market, a retail price, like all that kind of stuff has worked just fine for the majority of people selling properties, I guess. But I think now people are going to have more unique sets of challenges as sellers, for instance, more unique sets of needs. And to me, I don't know, to say that somewhat differently, there's going to be more of a need for that tailoring thing that I was talking about a few minutes. There's going to be more people who need custom pants than maybe there have been in the past. And so I think a person's ability to facilitate that conversation, listen, and know the toolbox that will structure a deal in the way that will get that person where they're trying to go, I think that that's going to be more and more valuable than it has been.
For sure. I mean, I was too young. Well, I guess I wasn't too young, but I was just getting out of high school to be buying property in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12. And at that period of time, people needed to sell because there was a financial need to do so. And just around the time that you really started ramping up, 2013 until now, rates have continuously been dropping. Real estate prices have been shooting to the moon. People have been selling because they wanted to sell. With rates going up, like who knows, you might be in this new position where you kind of have to flesh out these custom tailored reasons for why people are coming to you to want to put these deals together to sell. And it might be less of avoiding capital gains, wanting to extend payments, this, that, or the other. And it might be, I just need to sell this and I just need the income to pay for this transitional life period that I'm in right now. So, I think that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. It's impossible for anybody to know which way the market's going, up, down, left, right. It's in nobody's hands, nobody's control. It's just interesting to hear somebody's perspective of what they're feeling and what they're seeing out in the market, because it's on the front lines that you can see that first glimpse of where things might be heading, if they're heading in a different direction at all.
Totally. I just think it's good. It's easy to say, things are getting worse, but I just think things are changing. And that means that the game you're playing is changing. The strategies you need to employ to play the changing game are changing. The tools that you need to have it at your disposal and know how to use and stuff are changing. I think maybe it's like the one trick pony folks who are going to be left out in the cold, or like being forced to learn some new things, I guess. But no, I mean, I'm optimistic about it. A couple of things I think are really important. We need to own stuff that other people want, like just like the simple principles of demand. Like if you've got stuff that's like, it's not that high of demand in the first place, it's going to be some of the first stuff to fall off in terms of, like, if people start instead of 2 people per household, now it's 3. People are contracting a little bit, like they did, I think, in the 2008, 9, 10 kind of period. The first stuff that's going to get vacated is going to be the crappy stuff on the fringe. I mean, for lack of a better term, the stuff that wasn't that desirable in the first place. So high quality, high demand real estate to me is a fundamental principle. It's like day one of kind of thing I learned from my coach. It's like, let's not buy a bunch of random stuff. Let's own the stuff that historically everybody else wants to live here. People want to own this stuff. People want to rent this stuff. So I think that's a fundamental principle. And then also just sort of like providing some flexibility to yourself that, probably obviously you don't want to sign up for a bunch of super short term, like you got a short runway to refinance or sell something. You want to, like, you think you can get it done in 6 months. Let's give ourselves 18 to 24, like whether that's negotiating loans or whatever. Let's just provide some more cushion in ways, obviously our thoughts on pricing are changing. That's kind of a moving target as well. You could buy something at 300 one day and a month later it could be worth 280. So we just kind of have to create, I think, a lot of cushion for ourselves in all of these different things that could go wrong.
I couldn't agree more with any of that. And I think after all the value that you've been providing, this is really a perfect segue into what we call the big four. So,
Nice.
James, kick it off.
We're going to hit you with the hard ones, Jeff. So, what's something that you do in your life, personal finance, business, whatever direction you want to take it, that kind of just feels like a hack? Either things that, are helping accelerate your financial independence journey in whatever way that means to you. What do you do that feels like a hack?
Yeah, I think the hack is just remembering that money doesn't have to come from financial institutions. Like, there's money everywhere. People have money in retirement accounts. It doesn't mean that like literally everybody opens up their wallet. They're like, oh, look, I got an extra 30 grand here in my wallet. Do you want me to loan it to you? It's or in my checking account. But people have, retirement accounts that could be made self-directed. There's all sorts of things. And I think that normal people are much more of a reasonable source for funding than maybe most of us, assume. A lot of us say, like, I don't know any rich people, like, what, this and that. They don't have that kind of money, but we just have to like get out of our own way and sometimes just ask the question and know that when you're offering something, like, there's a big difference between, I need 30 grand, could you loan it to me, versus like, I have created a real estate opportunity where we've created a bunch of equity here and some cash flow, and somebody is going to be fortunate enough to benefit from my entrepreneurship. Would you like to be the person to benefit from my entrepreneurship? Like, maybe that's a cheesy way of saying it, but the point is we have to shift our mentality from I'm asking for money to I'm offering something of value. And I think when we do that, we can get back to that idea that like money doesn't just have to come from banks.
Absolutely.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. We call this one resources. So for everyone listening out there, are there any books, podcast, or people that have really shaped your thinking, have really meant something to you that you think our listeners would benefit from? Everybody knows Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is such a great book. If you're going to recommend one besides that one, but books, podcasts, people, like, help the listeners out, fill their Amazon carts.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure you can buy anything on Amazon from this person, but the person I it's like really the only answer to this question is my coach that I mentioned before, Greg Pinio. There's nobody else like him, anywhere, in terms of content, in terms of personality, in terms of the way he pours into students. And he has some educational programs, some stuff that's like, home study course, I guess, as they might have called it in the old days, something called the Masters Series. Then he has an event that is like just one of a kind thing called Power Players. And so those are a couple of things that I just cannot recommend those things highly enough. It's just a one of one kind of a scenario. This is not what you get elsewhere.
Boom. Everybody go check them out.
Yeah.
So Jeff, it's call this one the future you. It's 5 years in the future. Paint the picture of Jeff's business, his personal life, anything that you got going on that makes you feel excited about what you're doing today. Give us that 5-year picture. Where's Jeff at? Yeah,
that's a great question. When I think about 5 years down the road, I mean, one of the very first things comes to mind is kind of about impact. Like I said, I feel like this message that I've been, asked to be a messenger of, that I am trying to spread now. I would love for people to know it kind of as well as people will say things like, oh, the Burr method. And like, there's these expressions that we use that just kind of roll off our tongues. I'm trying to find the right way to, name and articulate that. And even if it's not what everybody does, that everybody is at least familiar with it. And I honestly feel like, I feel like buyers and sellers they both get the best wins when there's a perfect, well-facilitated, direct conversation between them. And I would love to have that idea be more kind of in the sort of mainstream consciousness of our industry. So that's a huge one for me. I absolutely want to still, continue growing my portfolio totally. But to me, growth is really sort of about continuing to get more and more and more discerning about how one spends their time, specifically in relation to like utilizing their strengths, right? So if you look at a typical deal I do right now, and let's just say like it's a 40% use of my strength. To me, 5 years in the future doesn't mean that I'm buying $20 million properties instead of $2 million properties. It means that I'm now 90% utilizing my strengths in a particular deal. I just believe a lot in a person's strengths, and that the idea of growth is just doing that more and more and more and better and better and better and more purely. So I don't know, maybe it's a weird answer. I hope that even makes sense. But like, as an example, like I could never see myself doing syndications, because my ability to sit down in someone's living room and to connect with them and ask them good questions and listen and tailor a solution is completely irrelevant in syndication. So when I think of something like that, like that's for other people, it's not for me, because I want to be doing what I do, like doing my magic better and better and better, more and more and more.
No, that makes complete sense. And I love your answer there. You know, becoming a better you, utilizing yourself to their fullest potential, you know, growing and, you know, trying to just, like you said, create a bigger impact to everybody else out in the world, and helping, you know, and that impacts you. That's with the coaching, you know, with everything, with having such a huge presence online. Check out all the Facebook investor groups. You know, we'll link to a bunch of them down below. But I mean, I think that you've brought a ton of value to the listeners. I know you've brought a ton of value to me. So with that being said, where's the best place for our listeners to get in contact with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. You know, I feel like I've tried to make my Facebook group, my free Facebook group, kind of like a hub for people to go to. So it's called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders. You can just look that up, or you could go group.thoughtfulre.com and that would take you right there. And then just the second thing I would say is maybe not to connect with me directly, but I try to put a lot of energy into my podcast, which is called Racking Up Rentals. And so that's a good way to continue to sort of, I guess, sample this way of thinking and see if it's for you.
I love it.
Well, we're going to link to the Facebook group and the podcast link in our show notes. So everyone should definitely go check that out and follow those resources. There's going to be a lot of insightful stuff there. But anyways, Jeff, we really appreciate you coming on, man. I think you shared a lot of great stuff with our listeners, a lot of great insights, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for asking great questions too. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Thank you so much. And you guys know the drill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow us on Instagram at The Real FI Podcast and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, Google, all of those. It really, really helps. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Real FI Podcast, where you learn from the investors that have lived the hard lessons for you. To connect with us during your pursuit of financial independence, be sure to join our community by following us on Instagram or emailing us at info@therealfi.com. If this content made you financially, mentally, physically, or spiritually richer, please make sure to leave us a positive review on your preferred content platform. Cheers to kicking the 9 to 5.